terms of tech, and they'd barely scratched the surface of what was beneath their feet. The corporation was finalizing the process of stabilizing their wormhole, and once they did that, they'd start to send more troops through with heavy machinery and everything they needed to strip mine this planet for everything it was worth. Griffin felt a little bad about that. The people living there were about to be taken to the cleaners, and probably wouldn't even know how badly they'd been deceived for generations. But that was the way of the world, right? Besides, he needed the payday. "We're almost done here, Faulkner," he said. He flipped through his drones. 2 were already finished with their sweeps, but the other 2 still had a way to go. Gunfire rattled from somewhere down the slope, and Griffin slapped the laptop closed and grasped his rifle. The drones could watch out for themselves for the moment. If their team was shooting at something, it was all hands on deck. They'd all learned how deadly this world was, and how quickly it would eat you alive if you didn't pay attention. He raised his rifle to his shoulder and went to join the others in their defensive position. Only one more day, maybe 2, and he'd be on his way home. He merely had to keep going a little longer. Chapter 1. Eric rose with the winter sun like he had every day for the last 3 months. Of course, this was not exactly something to crow about, given how short the days had been and how long the nights were. But it was different from his old life. In Dallas, back on Earth, he had only noticed the passing of the seasons by whether the HVAC in his apartment used heat or cooling. There, however, in the town of Avaldsnes, in the Nortier lands of another world, he paid careful attention to the coming of winter. The pine trees that covered the mountains outside the town had seemed indifferent to the snows. A few broad-leafed trees had turned a spectacular crimson and orange when the days had begun to shorten. These could be tapped for sap to make syrup, and also produced nuts before they succumbed to the season, which the town had harvested. The animals had provided vivid clues to the change of the seasons as well. When fall had come, the skies first grew loud with the honking of migrating geese, quacking of ducks, and the chirp of some kind of lizard the Nortier hunted with javelins and always cooked in soup. The furry creatures, he dared not call them mammals, even though that was how he thought of them, changed in color, as did some of the insects. And then, as if someone had flipped an invisible switch, all that noise fell silent. The geese vanished from the sky, having flown south, presumably. The calls of the birds, lizards, and insects of the forest ceased, and only days later, the first snows had fallen. But even more telling was the ice and the fjord. Each morning he followed the same basic routine. He and his spirit ally woke early and ran, or walked, depending on how late he had stayed up talking and drinking ale with Signe, around the town. During one of those crisp early morning runs, he had noticed a slush of ice lapping the shore. It had thickened by the next day, solidified on the third, and spread across the fjord towards the open ocean. Instead of gentle waves, a thin layer of ice reflected the morning sun. At the first sign of it, the Nortier pulled their longships way above the highest tide line, and there they stayed. The snows arrived not long after that, and blanketed the frozen surface of the fjord with rolling mounds of snow the people would not walk on for any reason. He had thought this superstition, since after a few weeks, large moose-like animals had crossed the ice without falling through. One day, however, some kind of whale with the face of a crab powered through the ice and swallowed one of the creatures that dared to cut across the fjord. After that, Eric had decided that sometimes it was best to follow local traditions. In all honesty, it was not as if the Nortier customs were without reason, even though he might not necessarily agree with it. When he had first arrived, it was against his will as the prize of a raid. He still had issues with the raids, but in the winter those were impossible. Trapped at home in their tiny